The Jedi Code sounds noble, doesn't it? No emotion, no attachment, no passion, just peace and clarity through the Force. But the more you think about it, the more it starts to sound less like philosophy and more like programming. Because what kind of peacekeeper begins their journey by being taken from their family as a baby? What kind of enlightened order teaches children to reject love before they've even experienced it? For centuries, the Jedi claimed to protect the galaxy from darkness, but they never realized they were creating their own. They didn't raise free thinkers. They manufactured obedience. Every youngling was shaped to fit the same mold, to obey the same rules, and to believe the same version of truth. It wasn't training, it was conditioning wrapped in robes and mysticism. The Jedi told themselves it was balance, but it was really fear. Fear of loss, fear of love, fear of being human. They turned the Force into a religion of restraint, where even compassion had to be filtered through doctrine. And every time someone questioned that system, they were silenced, exiled, or branded as dangerous. Look at how the Order treated Anakin, or even Ahsoka. One questioned authority, the other refused blind loyalty, and both were punished for it. The Jedi couldn't handle individuality because individuality meant choice, and choice threatened control. The greatest irony of Star Wars is that the so-called villains were allowed to feel, while the heroes were trained not to. The Jedi believed they were saving the galaxy from corruption, but in the process they became corrupted by their own fear of emotion. They didn't create peace, they enforced order, not harmony through the Force, but submission through ideology. And the scariest part is, they never even saw it. In this video, we're breaking down why the Jedi Code was never about wisdom or enlightenment, how the Order's teachings resembled brainwashing more than guidance, and why their so-called pursuit of balance was really the start of their own destruction. The Jedi Order liked to present itself as noble, wise, and deeply spiritual, but peel back the layers of robes and dogma, and what you actually find is a system built on control. From the very start, the Jedi weren't recruiting, they were taking. Infants were separated from their families before they could even form attachments, placed in temples, and raised to think the Jedi way was the only way. It wasn't mentorship, it was programming disguised as enlightenment. The Jedi preached freedom through discipline, but what kind of freedom begins with the erasure of who you are? The Code demanded they avoid emotion, but emotion is the foundation of being alive. Fear, love, joy, anger. These things make us human, or in galactic terms, are sentient. Yet the Jedi told their students to bury them, to suppress the natural parts of themselves in favour of cold serenity. That isn't growth, that's emotional conditioning. You can't learn empathy if you're taught to detach from everyone around you. You can't preach peace when your heart is disconnected from the very people you claim to protect. Think about how every Jedi speaks the same way, moves the same way, thinks the same way. There's no individuality, no expression, no room for doubt or deviation. They're not just trained warriors, they're moulded products of an ideology. The Code isn't guidance, it's a leash. And that leash ensured no Jedi ever asked the wrong questions, like who they really were fighting for, or why their entire lives were dictated by an invisible council's interpretation of an invisible force. Even the so-called wisest Jedi, like Yoda or Mace Windu, reinforced this culture of obedience. They spoke in riddles about peace and balance, but their every action was designed to maintain order, not truth. When Anakin questioned the Code, they didn't guide him. They shut him down. When Ahsoka questioned the Order, they exiled her. The Jedi were terrified of free thought because free thought threatened their control. And what's the difference between control through fear and control through faith? It's ironic that the Sith, the supposed villains, at least embraced emotion. They were destructive, sure, but they were honest about what drove them. The Jedi hid behind moral superiority, masking indoctrination with ceremony and ritual. Meditation wasn't always about clarity, it was about conditioning. A way to keep the mind quiet, obedient, compliant. When the Order finally fell, it wasn't because the dark side defeated them, it was because they built their own mental prison and called it virtue. If you watch The Phantom Menace, you can see it in how they treat Anakin. Here's a child, torn from his mother, terrified and alone. And the Jedi respond with lectures about fear and attachment. They didn't see a boy, they saw a potential problem to be managed. That's not compassion. That's control disguised as concern. It's no wonder Anakin's humanity eventually rebelled against the system that demanded he bury it. And that's the deeper tragedy of the Jedi. They believed the code would bring balance, but it only created imbalance inside themselves and across the galaxy. Because when you teach generations of children to fear emotion, you don't create peacekeepers. You create people incapable of empathy, haunted by guilt and blinded by arrogance. Let's talk about how the Jedi managed to convince themselves this system actually worked. Because it wasn't just the Council enforcing it, it was a culture that fed itself generation after generation. Jedi younglings were raised in an echo chamber where questioning the code was heresy. And since everyone around them believed the same thing, there was no external perspective to challenge it. Imagine growing up in a monastery where doubt is a sin and emotion is failure. That's not enlightenment, that's indoctrination with better PR. Their entire education system was designed to reinforce conformity. The lightsaber wasn't just a weapon, it was a symbol of discipline, control, and identity erasure. They even colour-coded them to signify rank and role like military insignia. Jedi Masters didn't teach individuality. They taught submission under the illusion of choice. And because it all came wrapped in noble words about peace and duty, most never questioned it. When a Jedi failed emotionally, the code was never blamed. The person was. Think of Anakin again. When he showed fear or love, instead of helping him understand it, they shamed him for it. They told him to suppress it. And when he couldn't, they acted like he was weak. But he wasn't weak. He was human. And that's the paradox that broke him. The Jedi taught him to be less than human, while expecting him to act like a perfect one. Even characters like Qui-Gon Jinn, who stood slightly apart from the Order, were treated as rebels for simply using their intuition. Qui-Gon believed in listening to the living force rather than the rigid rules of the Council, and that's what made him dangerous. He wasn't defying the Force, he was defying their control over it, which, ironically, made him more of a Jedi than the Order ever allowed. The Jedi Temple itself was a symbol of this detachment, an ivory tower above Coruscant, literally disconnected from the people they claimed to serve. They were physically and spiritually elevated, looking down at the chaos below, interpreting the Force like scholars reading from sacred texts. But the galaxy didn't need scholars, it needed empathy, the kind the Jedi had long forgotten how to feel. And this isn't just metaphorical, it's visible in every interaction they have with others. Whether it's the clones, the Senate, or even the people they claim to protect, the Jedi always approach with authority, not compassion. They never listen. They instruct. They don't understand. They decide. Their version of peace was never equality. It was compliance. By the time of the Clone Wars, this brainwashing had gone so deep that the Jedi didn't even recognize their hypocrisy. They were commanding armies of slaves and still calling themselves peacekeepers. They were fighting a war created by their own blindness, convinced it was the will of the Force. The Jedi didn't lose their way. They never truly had one. What's wild is that even after the fall of the Order, characters like Obi-Wan and Yoda still clung to the same failed ideas. They raised Luke in the same detached way, warning him of fear and attachment, while never acknowledging that those were the very things that doomed them. The system survived even after it was destroyed. That's how powerful indoctrination is. The Jedi's story is often told as a tragedy of hubris, but it's really a tragedy of conditioning. These weren't evil people, they were victims of their own teachings. The same rules meant to prevent corruption ended up breeding it from within. Every Jedi believed they were serving the Force, but what they were really serving was a doctrine too rigid to evolve. If you trace it back, the code's origin wasn't about peace, it was about survival. Ancient Jedi developed it after centuries of civil wars within their own ranks. The code was meant to stop them from tearing themselves apart, but instead of adapting with time, it calcified. What began as a tool became a cage. By the High Republic era, that cage was gilded, elegant, structured, but utterly hollow inside. And that's what makes the fall of the Jedi so poetic. They were destroyed by the same flaws they refused to acknowledge. Anakin didn't betray the Jedi, he exposed them. He showed the galaxy that their balance was built on repression, and repression always leads to collapse. When the Jedi tried to control the Force corrected them. Not out of malice, but out of balance. The few Jedi who broke free from this cycle. Like Ahsoka, a proof of what the Order could have been. She learned compassion outside of the system, not within it. She saw the difference between following the Force and following the Council, and that's why she survived when others didn't. She wasn't perfect, but she was free, and that's something the Jedi never truly were. Even Luke's journey mirrors this. His greatest failure wasn't losing Ben Solo, it was rebuilding the Jedi using the same broken philosophy. The galaxy didn't need more monks, it needed teachers, mentors, people who could guide without controlling. Luke's attempt to resurrect the old ways only proved how deep the programming went, even across generations. It's almost tragic how much good the Jedi could have done if they'd allowed themselves to feel. Imagine if they embraced love instead of fearing it, taught empathy instead of detachment, and used their power to connect instead of command. Maybe the Clone Wars never would have happened. Maybe Anakin never would have fallen. Maybe the galaxy never would have needed saving in the first place. In the end, the Jedi Code didn't just destroy the Order, it destroyed the meaning of balance itself. The Force was never about silence or control, it was about harmony. But the Jedi turned it into religion, and like all rigid religions, it lost touch with its purpose. That's the irony George Lucas hid in plain sight. The villains were emotional, but honest. The heroes were noble but broken. And the only people who truly understood balance were the ones who walked away from both sides entirely. The downfall of the Jedi wasn't written in prophecy. It was written in policy. From the moment they took their first child, they sealed their fate. Because when you strip away humanity in the name of peace, what you're left with isn't peace at all. It's emptiness disguised as wisdom. And that, more than any Sith plot or galactic war, is what truly destroyed the Jedi.
Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that share button. My main channel is Critical Analysis Hub, where I post Star Wars content about the movies. My secondary channel is Critical Analysis Hub Plus, where I focus on the shows of Star Wars. And my third channel is Critical Analysis Hub XP, where I post comic books. Be sure to take a moment and check them out. Thanks, and may the Force be with you.